finding relief from chronic unrelenting pain does not mean that you need to get a diagnosis if you're dealing with any kind of autoimmune condition or really any other chronic illness. It needs you to understand what's really going on at the root, what are the inflammatory mechanisms at play, and that's how you address the chronic pain, the constant pain, and the unrelenting pain that accompanies any kind of chronic illness, in particular autoimmune conditions, right? So these are the ways, there are ways to find relief from the constant pain that accompanies many chronic illnesses, as I mentioned. And there are many underlying factors which needs to be addressed. There can be cortisol imbalances, nutrient deficiencies like B6, all of which has a huge bearing on why we are in pain 24/7, right? So it's necessary to understand what's really going on rather than only focusing on getting a diagnosis. This is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to answer a couple of questions at the end. These are questions that get, if you have any questions, drop in. If you're joining me live, hi, good to see you. Make sure that you're here till the end. And if you like what I have to say, and if you would like to know more about how I can help you, if you're dealing with any kind of autoimmune disease, especially an undiagnosed one, then make sure that you use the link in the bio and schedule a free 45 minutes clarity call for my coaching program. So we can get to know if we are a right fit for each other. So autoimmune conditions have one thing that's really going on, right? So whenever your immune system is triggered or it mounts an immune response, which it will if it thinks anything is a threat, and it can be a food that you're having every single day, it can be a toxin that you're exposed to, it can be even a microbe, your immune system will switch into survival mode, and it will create these inflammatory chemicals. This is the primary mechanism by which inflammation develops, and if this goes on without any break, because you've not been able to address what's really going on, then this will be something which is going to become a part of your life, which is chronic inflammation. And the thing to understand first is your body is beautifully designed to handle any type of acute stress, acute inflammation, right? So your body has been very, very well designed. It knows what to do. That's how a species has evolved and survived millions of years of evolution. The problem is when this inflammation becomes chronic, and that's when medications stop working, and eventually we may get a disease diagnosis. If this inflammation carries on unabated, there are other reasons, of course, the genetics at play, gut health, everything, all of it put together. But the point is that this chronic inflammation can become a way of life, and we can go on to develop more damage to our tissues, and then eventually get a disease diagnosis, and that might actually happen much later down the line, right? So this is exactly what my client was dealing with when she came to me. She had a whole host of symptoms, but the primary symptom that she was facing was constant pain. In her case, it was in abdominal pain, it was joint pains, it was muscle ache, muscle fatigue. So many days she used to miss work because she could not get up from the bed. Nothing was really helping her. Painkillers would only provide temporary relief, and she had a whole host of other things going on as well. So when she came to me, I realized that there was a lot of ongoing inflammation, and that had to be tackled. And I share this analogy with anybody who is trying to understand what's going on, right? Why do we talk about inflammation so much? So imagine that there is a fire, there is a fire which has broken out in a house. And imagine that, obviously what we need to do is call the fire, either call the fire engine, fire station, or get enough fire extinguisher and try to extinguish the fire. But what if the reason that the fire broke out was a leak, somewhere, right? Suppose there was a gas pipe in the kitchen and that is leaking, and that's what's feeding the fire. So while we can focus on getting the best fire extinguishers, we can call all the, as many fire engines as we need to put out the fire, which is extremely important. At the same time, we need to understand where the leak is coming from and you need to plug that leak, right? So that's kind of what's going on in the case of any chronic illness, particularly in the case of autoimmune condition where pain is one of the major symptoms. There is a underlying fire going on inside your body, and that has to be addressed to find a long-term solution. Painkillers of course help with making the symptoms more manageable, but that's never going to be enough, right? So managing ongoing inflammation means that there are certain foods which are triggering an immune response, so that those foods have to be removed. There might be underlying imbalances which are there. In this client's case, we realized that she had severe deficiency of vitamin B6, and in fact having low levels of vitamin B6 increases our pain perception. It could also be, which we did not actually, so not all of it did we end up testing for, because this was during the pandemic, and but there are ways to connect the dots, and that's exactly what I do in my clients. I connect the dots and we figure out what is most likely going on. And when we address the underlying imbalances of low vitamin B6 levels in this client, we also figured out that low serotonin levels of serotonin was most likely a reality for her. And we don't go symptom by symptom, right? In functional medicine, the kind of health coaching that I practice, we are focusing on the root causes. We are looking at what are the upstream factors. So the downstream factors, the downstream are the symptoms that we are looking at. It might be pain, and I'm talking about pain in particular today, but what is going on really upstream. So as you go on further and further upstream, that's when you actually figure out what's going on. Like in this particular client's case, this constant unrelenting pain was most likely due to, as I mentioned, her foods that she was consuming, that she was sensitive to, that was triggering an immune response, which was obviously causing chronic inflammation every single day. In her case, it was most likely B6 deficiencies. In her case, it was also most likely serotonin, which also low levels of serotonin also increases our pain perception. So all of these, were going on. Okay, the other thing that typically happens for people with joint pain is that there are immune complexes that we form to certain foods, gluten being the number one, and when that happens, they get lodged into low circulation areas like our joints, which is why you have so many people with all kinds of joint pain, and that also needs to be addressed, right? And last but not the least, gut health. So all of this is what we actually had to tackle. And where a gut health is concerned, for example, it might be that there is an element which is found in the bacterial cell walls, liposaccharides, which trigger an immune response. So if we have that getting into circulation, which does happen because people with autoimmune conditions and many other chronic illnesses have something which we call a leaky gut or enhanced intestinal permeability, where the gut lining becomes which is supposed to be tight junctions, becomes a more permeable, allowing undigested food particles, toxins, microbes, and even liposaccharides to pass through, thus triggering an immune response. And that itself causes the immune system to release these inflammatory chemicals called cytokines, thus again leading to inflammation. So as you can see, it's a vicious cycle that we can get stuck in, which is why we have constant unrelenting pain 24/7. But the thing is, if we understand what all is going on, right, and which is exactly what I did with my client, we understand what are the possible connections. We start going further and further upstream rather than only getting stuck downstream with only the symptoms, because like she had over 200 symptoms, and that gets quite overwhelming. But when you go upstream, you actually figure out what are the root causes, what are the likely triggers, and you start laying a foundation of health creation, not disease management, right? That's another key distinguishing factor between conventional medicine and functional medicine. In functional medicine, we look at a root cause approach, and we talk about health creation, right? And so all of this is what we did with this particular client, and we focused on food first. We always do. Food is medicine, and the first thing that we remove are certain inflammatory foods that are causing because of, again, enhanced intestinal permeability, that is causing an immune response, and that is why you have a chronic ongoing inflammation which is contributing to your pain. And as I mentioned, there are other factors here. So for example, in the case of autoimmune conditions, one thing that starts happening is chronic stress, and the stress can be obviously the stress of living with the disease, which is the emotional and psychological stress, but it's also physiological stress, which is in the form of food sensitivities, so constantly consuming foods that we are sensitive to, or maybe exposure to certain toxins, which is again triggering an immune response. So all of it, processed foods actually have a whole load of chemicals, additives, preservatives, for example, and that itself triggers an immune response because it perceives, these are toxins for our system. We are not equipped to deal with it. So all of it actually contributes to ongoing inflammation, and when it has gone on long enough, because chronic ongoing inflammation is highly damaging for our organs and our tissues, and the body in its wisdom decides enough is enough. I need to sort of start making sure that the damage is contained, and that's when it actually starts lowering cortisol production. Now, cortisol is a master hormone. It is necessary for survival. There are a couple of other hormones which are also there, stress hormones, in the category of stress hormones, adrenaline and noradrenaline. So all of these work in tandem, and in fact all these hormones work in synergy with all the other hormones in our body, our thyroid, sex hormones, etc. Now, cortisol is also known as a master hormone. It has a role in many things: bone formation, bone health, thyroid hormone production. It has a bearing on many different other areas in our body, as it should. As I mentioned, it's a master hormone. And one of the things that happens when you have, if you have, initially, as I mentioned, if you have too high levels of cortisol, which is chronic stress, you have, your blood sugar level rises, insulin level goes up. So which is actually one contributor to, can be to pre-diabetes and then diabetes, insulin resistance for sure. The other problem becomes when cortisol levels becomes too low, right, chronically. And the reason is, and this again is extreme, the reason I'm mentioning this today is that this is extremely common in people with autoimmune conditions. Eventually, this is the stage that they reach, not always, but many times. And because cortisol is also an anti-inflammatory agent, what happens is that it no longer is able to contain the inflammation, right? So cortisol works at multiple levels, and just for you to understand that it is also an anti-inflammatory agent, so it keeps inflammation in control. Now, when you have low levels of cortisol, especially when it's supposed to peak, and it's supposed to peak first thing in the morning, right? When we wake up, we're supposed to have a burst of cortisol so that we can have enough energy and to get through our day. And be ready for our day, and then it starts tapering through the day. But that does not really happen when we have low suppressed cortisol, right? And again, this is because your body in its wisdom has chosen to be in this low cortisol state. This is important for you to understand, right? So when that happens, then you don't have the anti-inflammatory effects of cortisol anymore, especially in the morning, which is why you will find that many people with autoimmune conditions, with arthritic kind of inflammatory conditions, have their pain highest in the morning, right? When your cortisol actually is supposed to be high, but it's not enough, and its anti-inflammatory effect is no longer there to help you, right? So you have all the stiffness and the pain typically highest in the morning. So that's one major reason for that. Anyway, so just to bring everything back to this client, so we worked on certain foods which are anti-inflammatory, which is typically the fruits and the vegetables. All the colors of the vegetable is where we started, and starting slowly is sometimes necessary because people's gut can be in really bad shape. So suddenly changing their diet or increasing and adding a whole lot of fiber may not be really helpful. But in this particular case, we had to go really slowly because she also had chronic diarrhea, which was ongoing for 7 years when she had come to me. And the only way that she could manage it at that time was antibiotics and oral steroids. It's only after working with me for several months, 5 months to be exact, that we figured out the trigger, and her diarrhea came under control without the use of any medications, right? So this is what I mean by going further and further upstream to figure out what's really going on. And when you can do that, you don't you don't need a diagnosis to get your pain under control, right? So whether it's your pain or any other symptom. Of course, we may need further data, we may need medication, so it's not an either or situation, as I like to call it. But it all starts by tuning into your body's wisdom, by becoming more aware of how foods that you're eating are affecting your body, your mood, how your lifestyle is affecting your body. So all of it, is works together, and this forms a big part of my own coaching program. I call it a body guided approach vis-a-vis an expert guided approach, right? Because in an expert guided approach, you're only banking on external data and external validation and expert opinions, whereas in a body guided approach, you're driven and you get the direction from your own body, so which never really lies. And that's when you know whether you're on the right track, and you know what's going to help and what's not going to help, right? And it becomes much easier to change direction, make changes, make tweaks when you need to, because you're guided by your own body, right? So this is extremely important thing to understand, because when this happens, you move from what I call being a powerless patient with no power really over their own life, health and body, which is typically what happens in the case of severe chronic illnesses like autoimmune disease. And you move from a powerless patient to an empowered explorer, right? And the reason I call this being an exploration is because I consider healing as a journey. It is a journey which takes time, which takes commitment, and our responsibility towards ourselves, towards our body, and it has its own ups and downs, right? Just like any other journey. But it's also important to enjoy the journey, the whole process, to understand what's going on, and prepare for the journey like you would for any new adventurous journey. Take it as an adventure, which is where exploration comes in. And you will realize as you go along this journey, true healing happens when you actually are able to explore both your inner and outer worlds, right? Not enough to only focus on your outer world, which is your supplements and medications and treatments. You also need to explore your inner world, which is where your strength, your resiliency will come from, right? So knowing your strengths, becoming more aware of how your body is reacting to certain things is your exploration of inner worlds. When you put these two together, that's when things start to shift, right? So if you can, if this resonates with you and you think that you need to move from a powerless patient to an empowered explorer, make sure that you drop in a comment below, say yes, so that I know that you've understood what I've been trying to talk about today. And so if you have any further questions, these are some of the things that come up when I talk to people, with the pain medications, why is it not working? But so now you would understand that what's really going on. So till you sort all this out, till you sort of address all these imbalances, and there might be nutrient deficiencies like I mentioned, like B6 or serotonin, maybe, that's not a nutrient, but these deficiencies, etc. And that does not happen by just throwing supplements at it, but to start creating health at a very foundational level, starting with food. That's when you will start seeing things changing for the better. You will start seeing improvements in your symptoms, reduction in intensity, reduction in the number of symptoms that you're having, right? And of course, reduction in pain to a large extent, depending on how much you're able to do. So that's what I have to share today. If you would like to know more about how I can help you with all of this, I have a couple of slots available in my coaching program. It's called Healing from Within. It's for women with undiagnosed autoimmune conditions. Make sure that you schedule a free 45 minutes clarity call using the link in the bio.